disrupt or die. I figured I would give us all kind of like a smack in the face after lunch, so we wake up a little bit. Messages like this keeps getting pushed at us as a very high frequency, and it's really hard to not be affected by them. It doesn't really matter what role you have in your company, or if you're a founder, or a CEO, or an employee, we do get affected by it. And it can make you feel a little bit like this. Poof. It's a lot to take in. And what happens then is that we become a little bit distant. We say, well, there's a lot happening in the world, but those articles, they're not about me and my world or my company or my reality. There's someone else. It's happening to someone else. But that's not really true, and I think we all know that deep down inside. So today I want to spend some time talking about how we set the stage for innovation. So now we're all inspired, and we heard a lot of great stories, but how do you actually get down to action? How do you go from just talking about it, reading these articles, feeling slightly stressed about it, to start implementing processes, activities, initiatives, to start innovating and seeing results? So setting the stage for innovation. I've spent the last couple of years obsessing about this. What differs a successful organization from one that is not? Why are some more innovative than others? Sometimes it feels unfair that this is the case. And I was very fortunate at Spotify to be able to explore with different frameworks and models and ways of doing this in an organization that was moving extremely fast and was very creative in an industry that was disrupting. So I learned a lot there. I also looked at some of the most innovative companies in Silicon Valley, the ones that we all kind of look up to, the Apples and the Googles and the Netflix. When I did my master thesis and asked them these type of questions, how do you think about this? How do you organize yourself? How do you define innovation? How do you keep constantly innovating? So I've learned a lot, and today I'm gonna talk about two things. First, I was thinking about that we'll zoom out a little bit and try and understand why are we talking to about innovation so much today. And then we'll get down to the details on how you can structure your organization to get started. And hopefully when we wrap up, you are not stressed and have anxiety about innovation, but you're excited about the opportunities and the potential of it, what's happening in the world. Sounds good? So this is a really, 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 really powerful statement, and I can imagine that it's been on some slides today. The world has never changed this fast, but it's probably never changed this slow again. And we know this, but what does it actually mean? What does it mean for me? So I started reading a lot about, all the trends report that comes out when one year goes into the other. And here are some interesting areas. So if we look at technological acceleration first, these graphs are simplified but not modified. So first we have microprocessors, which makes all our technology faster and better. There are more people on the internet today than ever before. Cloud computing revenue is going up, which means that we're doing more things in the cloud, which drives digitalization and globalization forward. We have more people with smartphones. We kind of know these facts already, but these graphs are kind of dramatic in a way. And how does this affect industries then? This is only a couple of examples, but we know that Airbnb is disrupting the whole industry of tourism, what Uber has done to transportation, or what Amazon is doing to the whole retail industry. I mean, if you're from Sweden, we don't see this as much because we're not a focus market for Amazon, but if you spend a lot of time in the States, they are everywhere. They want to deliver stuff to you with drones. They have a supermarket in Seattle where you go in, you take your stuff, and you walk out, and it kind of charges your credit card automatically. And they do a lot of these things. On the finance side, we have smartphone payments and micro payments and micro jobs, and we don't really know what that's going to do to the world economy yet. But it's interesting to reflect on what's the Airbnb and the Uber of your industry or your world that you're operating in. And then this kind of spills over to climate and social change. So we do know that we are more people in the world and we keep growing, and more people are living better lives than ever before, which means that also our planet is paying for that in terms of our temperatures are going up, and we're releasing more shit out into the atmosphere. So this is only a few examples, and if you just summarize this, I found a very interesting report talking about that the amount of change we experienced in the past 10,000 years, we're now going to experience in the coming 90. I mean, that scale, you can even I have not that long arms, but I mean, 10,000, 90. So when we talk about what's going to happen in 5 years, I don't think we can answer that at all, which is scary. And that's also, if you look at what's happening in companies in this new world, the curve goes exactly the opposite way. It goes like that. It's just a bit sad. So you probably recognize these data points because they've been shared and discussed a lot, but it's the S&P 500 list, the average life length of a company. In 1960, it was around 60 years, and today that number is 15 years. And if you look at what the forecast is, it looks like it's just going to keep going that way. So in the coming 10 years, 50% of those companies are going to be gone, and like the biggest companies in the world, with smart people working there, really smart people, with great products and great services. So this is real, it's happening. So what this means is that you can't really just keep doing business as usual. You can't just chill around and eat bamboo and sleep like pandas do. I think the pandas are safe though, but it kind of shows a little bit how a lot of us are still behaving. So what to do and where to begin? It's the same with kind of innovation, digitalization, diversity. We know it's important. We know we have to do it, but it's really hard because it's big and complex and buzzwordy, and you get all those articles shoved in your face all the time. But I have a theory here, and that is that companies that are good at innovation, they do a few things right. And now I'm going to warn you, it's a little bit of a messy slide, but we will go through it. So I believe that they have a few things in place. First of all, they have long-term goals. They have a strategy, why they exist. And then they have kind of, see, this is a highway with different lanes. They have a Horizon 1, that's the coming 12 months. What are we doing here? And then they have the coming 1 to 3 years out. What are we doing there? And then you have 3 years and beyond. And by splitting up your portfolio like that, you become less vulnerable to only being here. So a good exercise to go home and do is map out your project portfolio to different time horizons to see, are we only operating here? We are very vulnerable to change. The second thing they do is they split up those big, hairy goals into strategic initiatives or areas, so they're more approachable, so we can start experiment with them. Then they open up for ideation. And that does not mean that 4 smart people sit in a room and come up what they're going to do. That means going out to talking to your consumers, talking to your employees that meet the customer or that is in production, or anyone you think can have good input to expand your own worldview and help you make the right decision. So then you get lots of ideas, and ideas are not linear, so they don't fall into a specific time horizon. We don't know that yet, but that's why we select, and we cluster them, and we connect them to strategy. That's why this is yellow. Very logical, right? So we select for our ideas, and then we go into development and commercialization. But here we do a lot of testing, but we'll get into that later. Another important thing is that it's very different to work here in lane 1 than in lane 2 and lane 3. So here it's kind of straightforward. It's business as usual. We have a steady business model that is giving us recurring revenue. We know that the next week is going to be kind of similar to this week. Here it's a little bit more explorative, utmanande in Swedish, but it's still fairly iterative. It's incremental innovation. It's adding a feature here, a new marketing channel there. English is hard. A new marketing channel there, or whatever it might be. And then you have this one, which is really confusing and a lot of exploration. And you're not actually sure if you will get return of investment on your efforts there. But it will most likely be tomorrow's Horizon 1. And that's why we have these arrows here. The last thing here is culture and leadership. And that goes across the whole chain. People is everything, and how we lead and what culture we build. This percentage here is just something I made up, but that's how you split your time and your effort and your budget and your resources. So if you are, for example, a cab company right now, who is an industry in disruption, you would probably spend more time here figuring out what are we going to do than if you're in a new industry where everyone might be up here thinking about it. So it really depends. So there's three big building blocks here. There's strategy, there's process, and culture. So I was thinking that we'll jump into each of those sections and look at some concrete methods, frameworks, tools that you can use to kind of figure out how to work with this, because it's different for every company, depending on the industry, the size, the culture, and I also have a few examples from how we did this at Spotify. Because Spotify just got, I'm not sure if you say awarded, but we ended up on Fast Company's list as number 10 of the world's most innovative companies. And I realized I just said we. I should stop that because I don't work there anymore. But everyone who just switched jobs know how hard it is, especially if it's a company you like. So let's start with strategy, the most high level. And here there is a big question you need to answer. Why are we innovating? What's the goal of it? And there's typically two answers here, growth or profit. And it's really hard to do both because it costs money to grow. But if you manage to do that, you have some sort of like strategy nirvana. And last night at the speaker dinner, we actually talked about that maybe it should be a third bubble here, sustainability. Because it's important, and it will be even more important in the future. But when you figure out why you're innovating, you need to check where you are and how you're doing. So this is kind of taking those horizons, but mapping them out in a different way. And I'm sure many in here have heard about the S-curve. But basically what you have here is, here is kind of your Horizon 1. So you need to check, are you in emergent or in a growth phase, or is your business maturing? Are the curves slowing down a little bit? And what's counterintuitive here is that when you're growing the most, that's when you need to start looking at the next thing, so you can make the jump at the right time. And successful company that's been around for many, many years, they manage to do this. But usually we are here in growth, and we're super excited, and we don't really think about that time is moving on, and all these changes happening really fast. So we don't think about this one. But this is what we try to find in Horizon 2 and Horizon 3. Another way to look at it, also zooming out a lot, is the growth gap, which I think many in here have seen and are sitting with. And that is like, okay, here is the return of investment of our current business. Here is a very optimistic 5-year business plan and absurd KPIs that no one's ever going to reach. And here is the growth gap between, and this is where you need to find those innovations, those 10x. 10x is, by the way, very innovation lingo, but what it means is that you don't want to grow with 10%, you want to go with 10x, which is very, very hard to do if you already have an established business model, because you might have to move completely out of that. Yes, so at Spotify, we used horizons as like the kind of the basic, and then we made our own model that we called mountains, and it's a metaphor for when you're doing this kind of like broad exploration, you figure out what mountains should we climb and how should we climb them to figure out if there's something interesting on the top. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but it made sense to us. So we had lots of those strategic areas. We weren't sure what horizons they would fit into, and we put them in different buckets. So we put them in business models. So that was, for example, the free tier and the subscription tier. Then we had a bucket called capabilities. So what we can do, and that is what type of content, what type of technology, how many credit cards do we have on file, all those things that were assets to us. And then we looked at growth areas, which is where we can be. Mainly markets, but also, for example, moments in people's lives. And then we did like a Venn diagram thingy where we said, are there any, like a slot machine, if we take a business model capabilities and growth areas and put them together, do we get interesting combinations that match our vision and mission and where we want to go, but it's also feasible? So we wanted to find this sweet spot here. And that helped us to prioritize. Because if you have 50 things you want to do, you need some way to figure out what makes sense to us to do right now. And it also helped us to stay focused when lots of other things came in that challenged that. So I do think that you can use these frameworks as a baseline and then tweak them to fit your needs. But it's good to have something to fall back on that is very simple to understand. Jumping over to process. Process is a little bit of a boring word, but I love it. It's super useful. And here there are two types of processes, I would say. It's business as usual, and it's my colleague Agnes that came up with this when we were trying to see the difference between execution and exploration. So this is our Horizon 1, business as usual. We can do a lot of analysis, forecast, roadmaps, milestones, all those things we like to do to feel that we're on track and are productive. But here, new turf, we don't know. There's no point of doing this because there's nothing to measure on yet because it's new. So we need to work with hypotheses. We need to have assumptions, go out and test them very quickly and cheaply and see if those assumptions seem to be right before we go and do the roadmaps and the forecasts and all that, which is weird for us as humans. We like to plan and then go do instead of do and then go back and plan. So it's kind of flipping the model around. If we go into a little bit more detail about hypotheses as a concept, they are interesting and very hard to kind of work with. So here you have 4 different levels of how you should plan every project. So you should be able to say, what is the need? Oh, this is kind of a clicker from 1990 or something. And since I'm a millennial, it's very hard for me. So you need to figure out the need. What are we, is there a need that we're solving here with this? Then you need to figure out if there's a value. Do people want to pay for this? Or is there any other value for us in this? Brand value or whatever it might be. Then you need to see, do we have the credibility to do this? If you're talking about Horizon 3 and pretty disruptive innovation, you might go into new markets and new business, industries, and you might not have the credibility that you need. So then it's, can we build that credibility? And then you go into the actual solution. And what we always do is go here. We start here. So I actually printed this and put it on my desk at work because I need to remind myself of that when we do this. Start with the need, the value, credibility, and then the solution. Again, it's like we as humans like to go to the solution because that's very defined. So it's a good check to go to your project and see, are we actually having these boxes ticked? The innovation process, there are many versions out there. There's usually 4 steps to it, and they're usually something like this. This is the one that we're building our innovation platform based on, and I think it's really good because it's like a machine. You put in strategic initiatives here, and then you go through ideation, so you go broad, and you ask lots of people that you want input from, and it's messy here. Ideas collide, you challenge, you build on each other's ideas. Then you select them, you cluster them, you go into a test phase with your hypothesis defined, you run experiments, you learn a lot. And what's interesting here is that we often think that for innovation to be successful, something needs to come out here. But this is also important. Like, you can call it failure, but we don't like that because we learn in school that failure is bad. So we can call it learnings instead, and we feel a bit better about not launching something and getting over this feeling of sunk cost. But this is really important. You build your innovation portfolio. Even if you decide to not go ahead with a project or an idea or a test, you still learn something. And you are in Horizon 2 and Horizon 3, and you are constantly trying to keep up with what's happening in the world, which makes you less vulnerable to disruption. So this is good. And it's also like a long time, how do you say it in English? Like at an airport where you long-term parking space. Långtidsparkeringen. It just stands there. And then maybe the technology is ready, the ecosystem is ready, then you have actually already done some exploration, so you're not completely surprised by it. So it's a way to protect yourself as well. But sometimes we do want to go to development, and what's good here is that you have a project specification with ideas, with the hypotheses, with the experiments, with the learnings, which makes what you're going to develop much more clear than when you get a high-level KPI from your boss saying, go and solve this. It's hard. So you go broad here again, figuring out what's the best way to build this or make this. And then you kind of narrow down again when you are taking it to market, figuring out what's the right price structure, what's the value proposition we want to have, and so on. And it's important to distinguish exploration from execution. And there's usually different people are good at these two different things. Some have both brains and are geniuses, but usually we're more comfortable here or here. So we need to make sure that we get a good momentum through this. So Spotify example, we were a little bit messy in our processes before we had an innovation system in place. It was a lot like this, very much age-free everywhere, horizon-free. So what we did was we implemented a very lightweight and dynamic innovation process, because it's not like when you are going to do something, you want to read a 200-page PDF about how to do it. It needs to be like, you can take it from the shelf, you can kind of get familiar with it really quickly, and you can get started. So that means that we increased the number of innovation sprints we did because we made it so easy to use. And it was easy to kind of understand the underlying concepts as well. So at Spotify, we build things they build things. I'll get there. In a framework called Think It, Build It, Ship It, Tweak It. So Think It here is kind of the exploration phase. So this is where we use the innovation process, but we actually use it in all phases, but in different ways. So it starts with discover it, which is understanding the space you're in. What type of data and insights do we want to look at, both big and small? And kind of just trying to understand, should we even be here? Do we have what it takes? And then we go into defining the problems we want to solve and the opportunities we want to go after. And we have those two pieces in place. Then we jump into solutions. So you're not allowed to jump into solution mode before you have these two pieces in place. And what we want to do then is that we want to have one problem, and then we want to have many, many solutions to that one problem, because we want to challenge our own assumptions on what we think is right. And lastly, we go out and we test it. And we try to do this really quickly. No 3-month project plan. No. Maybe 3 hours or 3 days, but quick. And in order to help guide us through this, we made kind of like a buffet of tools. You can say that it's like a table of ingredients, and depending on the cookie you want to make, you pick different tools. And this could be like, how many people are we? How much time do we have? Is it more of a strategic thing, or is it more detailed? And by having this, we could plan this really quickly. It didn't have to take 3 months to plan. We could do it in an hour, and it would still be a very structured and productive workshop. So we wanted to kill all this like workshop bias that we have that is great when you're there often, but then nothing happens afterwards. So now, since this is recorded, I can unfortunately not DJ for you, but I usually do that because we have a soundtrack to this innovation process. Because I'm a firm believer that you can soundtrack everything in life, and music makes life better. But important to remember with innovation processes overall is that it can be quite frustrating. Maybe not this frustrating. But 90% of the ideas you come up with, around 90%, is stuff that you throw away or park in the long-term parking space. And that's hard. I mean, in media, you get a very glorified picture of what working with innovation looks like, because you read about Uber and Amazon and all those, and the successful experiments. But a lot of it is actually killing your darlings, which can make you sad, because we care about what we do, and we get attached to our projects. But sometimes it just doesn't work out. Okay, he actually looks kind of angry. Maybe we'll skip that one. We'll jump to culture instead. So I have a love-hate relationship with culture. because it's so important, but it's so hard to measure and understand if what you're doing is having an impact. And it's also usually takes a lot longer time than, for example, implementing a process. But they say that culture eats strategy for breakfast for a reason, and that's because it's true. It doesn't matter how good your strategy or process is if you don't have a culture that is open to new ideas. And I'm fascinated by this thing called creativity, and when it comes to us. So I asked this question on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, because I wanted to know when people felt creative. And there's not many people who said that it was at work. But it's not linear, and we have designed the workplace and how we come up with things in a very linear way. It's this 4-hour strategy workshop we do every spring, where we set the strategy and then we revisit it a year after. Well, the world doesn't work like that, and we don't work like that. Our creative processes doesn't work like that. It was my frustration with not being able to capture people's creativity whenever they are, whatever they're doing, that kind of wanted me to go and build a good platform for it with today's technology, because the technology is there. And we're using it a lot in other social medias and stuff. It just hasn't transformed over to organizations. So I think it's huge potential there. And it's a messy process. And sometimes you go too broad, you ask too big questions, and that can make you feel that you don't have any creativity left. Like, where is the world going in 5 years? That's a very big question. Very creative people might come up with a brilliant answer, but most of us feel more like, huh. Or you go really structured, and this comes back to that problem with going on solutions. If you ask on feedback for a solution, well, you get feedback on that solution, but you don't get input on how to solve the underlying problem. So it's very much about how you kind of define the scope of what you're doing. Yes, and? Anyone doing improv theater here? Yeah, so yes, and is something that we borrowed from improv theater, and that's about building on each other's ideas. We love to be the devil's advocate. When someone comes and shows us something, we kind of want to find errors in them often, which is not good. We should build on each other's ideas and always say yes and, not no but. It's hard because you are realistic and you are accountable for the KPIs and what's happening on the so you don't really have time for employees running around thinking about creative stuff. But in this new world, I think that those creative employees might be your greatest resource, for real. And I think that we should find ways to let them explore. Of course, we still need to have the core business running, but that's not all that matters. I'm going to speed up a little bit, but there's 2 types of organizations, those that have lots of ideas, luxury, those that have none. And everyone falls somewhere on this spectrum. So a good exercise is seeing, okay, where are we on this spectrum? Have we totally killed humans' kind of need to create and improve, or are we actually very creative? And then it's about how do we kind of transform that to value. Lastly on this one, something that I'm very passionate about, diversity and how that drives innovation. We know that this is true, but yet we do not live like we know. Wait, that was a weird sentence. We know it's true, but we don't do anything about it. So, like, if you are able to contribute and feel that your voice is heard, you get extremely motivated. And that builds great culture, and it also builds a workplace where people want to stay. So it's great for talent retention as well. Hear our voice. Okay, so to wrap up, it never looks this structured. This is a PowerPoint or a Keynote. But having this in the back of your head and having these 3 components helps you to structure and get started with innovation work. It helps me in a lot of different contexts, at least. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. You have to design your own. This was my first sketches of Spotify's innovation system when I started. It's, yeah, you have culture here, and strategy is up here somewhere. Here's the process. Here is where ideas can come from. Here is what's happening, how we test with the world, how it feeds back. You know, it's a messy thing, but it has to be. Because if it was easy, everyone would do it. And we probably wouldn't call it innovation. So I want to leave you with this little innovation to do that you can bring back and work with if you want. If you want help, you can call me. I love to do this type of things. But it brings up a few things. Oh, sorry. It brings up a few things around strategy. So with S-curve and horizons, about it's important to have an innovation process, how to shift to hypothesis-based ways of working. I do think innovation should be in performance reviews because it's so important. But most important is to get excited. Figuring out the future is really fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sofie.
Thank you.
Thank you.